In this video, we'll talk about solving quadratic equations by factoring. This is a continuation of another video where we talked about factoring quadratic expressions. So this will be a direct extension of that. So let's just go ahead and look into an example here. Since we've already talked about factoring, let's see what we can do. Now, thus far we've only talked about one way to solve quadratic equations, and that is using the zero product rule. So meaning that I have everything equal to 0, and I'm going to try and write this expression as a product of two things. Meaning I write it as a thing times a thing. And it could be an expression, could be a number, could be whatever. So long as I have two things times each other equals 0, well then I can solve both of them individually by setting them both equal to 0. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to try and factor this quadratic expression. Now again, to get x squared, the only way we can do that is, well, we have to have an x and an x in our parentheses. And then I'm going to look at the 6, and I'm going to think, okay, factors of 6. What numbers multiply to make 6? That'd be 6 and 1, 2 and 3. And I have to have a positive 6 and make them add to a positive 5, just like we talked about. So I could get to 5 with 6 and 1, however, one of them would have to be negative to make it happen, and then that would result in a negative 6. So the 6 and 1 are not going to work in this case. The 2 and the 3 are. 2 times 3 makes 6. Positive 2 plus a positive 3 makes a positive 5x. So x plus 2, x plus 3. In this case, it wouldn't so much matter what order you have them in because they're both positive. Now I have x plus 2 times x plus 3 is equal to 0, which tells me either x plus 2 equals 0, or, and or being the important word here, x plus 3 equals 0. It's one or the other. I wouldn't be able to distinguish which one is which until I know more about this problem, but for now I can at least narrow it down to two things. So let's continue with this. If x plus 2 equals 0, that would tell me x has to equal negative 2, and likewise, x plus 3 equal to 0 would tell me x has to equal negative 3. And then I would put or in between them, and this would be my solution. X equals negative 2 or x equals negative 3. Both of these would satisfy this original equation. Now if I'm given some context, maybe I can eliminate one of the two, but as far as it stands right now, this is the best I can do. I've narrowed it down to two possible solutions. Let's go ahead and look at another one. So, if we're looking at this, it's not quite as cut and dry as the other one. The other one had already set up equal to 0. So that would be my first step. I want to move everything to one side of the equation so that I have 0 on the other side. So I'm going to add 12x to both sides here. So I'm going to have x squared plus 12x minus 13 is equal to 0. Now again, I'm going to look at this expression and I'm going to try and factor it. So the x's, again, pretty easy. So we'll have x and x. That's the only way I can make x squared. And then I'm going to look at the factors of 13, which in this case, 13 is prime. So it's 13 and 1. Now, one of those has to be negative. That's what this sign is telling me because I have to make a negative 13. Then I look at the 12. That'll tell me which one has to be negative. So I have to make a positive 12, which would tell me if I have 13 plus a negative 1, that would make my positive 12. So that tells me the 13 is positive and the 1 is negative. And then, very similar to the other one, I'm going to look at both of these individually because I have a product of two things. This x plus 13 times x minus 1 equals 0. That tells me one of them must be 0. I don't know which, but one of those two must be 0. So this would tell me x plus 13 is equal to 0, or x minus 1 is equal to 0. Then I would solve both of those. Very similar fashion to the last example. And I would say x has to equal negative 13, or x has to equal positive 1. And that would be the best I can do for now. I've narrowed it down to at least two possibilities because both of these would satisfy this original equation. So a good tip for now, if you're trying to solve these by factoring, make sure your first step is to set everything equal to 0. And just a recommendation, try and make it to where your x squared is positive out here. So if this was a negative up here in the original line, I would have moved the x squared over to the other side to make it easier to factor for myself.